Everybody. Sorry for the delay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Afternoon.
Okay, we're going to begin shortly. We were waiting for our speaker to join in on the Zoom. As many of you may know, the month of March is universally celebrated as National Athletic Training Month. We use this time as athletic trainers to raise awareness of the profession and our role as a part of the sports medicine umbrella. Athletic trainers are clinicians guided by 6 domains to provide comprehensive preventive services to athletes and other physically active individuals. Injury and illness prevention not only reduces morbidity, it reduces costs while improving quality of life. In the event of an injury, the overall goal is to return the athlete or patient to work, life, and sport. Many of the devices and materials that we see, touch, and use in the day-to-day life of athletic training, from the lab to the clinic to the field, have all been developed through the field of biomedical engineering. Helmets that are commonly used for high contact sports, such as football and baseball, have been designed by engineers with the athlete's safety in mind. In addition, the use of various therapeutic modalities, such as ultrasound and electrical stimulation, aid in the treatment of sport-related injuries. Every time a patient gets an MRI or X-ray, they're using diagnostic tools designed by engineers to determine the severity of the injury and if surgery is needed. Today, we hope to educate our students and the wider sporting community on how biomedical engineering drives innovation in the field of sports medicine. Before we begin, allow me to give a brief academic background on today's speaker. Mrs. Trenicka Dukes obtained her undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering at Virginia Commonwealth University in 2011. In 2014, she completed her master's in mechanical and nuclear engineering. Trenicka is currently pursuing a Master of Science in Law at Northwestern University and hopes to use her degree to gain leverage with understanding and applying law and business concepts to engineering and technology. Trenicka is extremely passionate about engineering and education and hopes to utilize that passion to fuel growth in the Bahamas. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Trenicka Dukes.
Hello, hello. Oh, let me turn on my video.
Yeah.
I realized I hadn't done that. Can everybody see me? It should be visible. All right. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to Shakitha for giving me this opportunity to come and talk to you guys today. It's definitely a pleasure of mine. I always get excited when I get a chance to share about my career and why biomedical engineering is so cool and it's so fun, and it's something that I think is a really great career path that a lot of us don't know about, but the more of us know, the more exposure we have, then there's an opportunity for more of us to actually get into this type of field. So yeah, with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So just give me 1 second. Let me pull that up. So I'm trying to use this fancy presentation software, so bear with me. I hope it works properly today. So, okay. All right, you should be able to see my screen. Now I'm going to try to minimize all these things that I got going on here. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and start from here. Now let's see, waiting for this thing to, go here. There we go. All right, so my topic today, which most of you should know, I don't know how to get rid of this thing here because it's in the way, but engineering performance, advancing biomechanics through biomedical engineering. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the introduction. I'll kind of introduce myself a little bit more, talk about my career as a biomedical engineer, what I currently do today, and then we'll kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty details about biomedical engineering as well as biomechanics, and then how that applies to sports and sports performance and things of that nature. And then, of course, we'll conclude and there'll be any questions and answers. We go from there. So let's begin. All right, so a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Grand Bahama. So I am from Freeport, love being from Freeport. And then today, my current location, I currently live in Denver, Colorado. So I moved from the Bahamas, obviously, when I went to college back in 2006. When I went to go pursue my bachelor's degree, I moved then. And I was in the US for about, I would say, 9 years because I got both of my degrees back to back. And then I went home for about 3 years, I would say. After that, I lived and worked at home, worked at PharmaChem for about 2 years, and then got an opportunity to move back to the US. And I've been working and living here in Denver, Colorado ever since. So I currently work at a company called Medtronic. We are the largest global medical device company across the world. We have an expansive portfolio of products that range from anything you can think of, from your heart to your lungs, because we make ventilators, we make surgical devices, things for brain stimulation, neuromodulation, things of that sort. So we have a very expansive product portfolio. I specifically work in our surgical innovations area. So I work with a lot of surgical devices that we create. So we help surgeons in the course of surgery, as far as, when it comes to incisions, cuts, ligatures, things of that sort. We do a lot of work in that area. But overall, as a biomedical engineer, I'm pretty versed in all aspects of it. But one of my favorite areas, and that's why I jumped at the opportunity to talk today about this, because one of my favorite subjects coming into my collegiate program was biomechanics. So I think that was like my favorite subject. And so I jumped at the opportunity to talk about this as it relates to performance in sports. So my current role today, I serve as a senior manufacturing engineer. So I work directly with our plant in terms of being able to produce the products that we make. So I think it's really cool to come up with an idea for a product, but if you can't build it, then it doesn't make sense. So that's where a lot of our work is done. And then just a couple of fun facts about me. I love cooking. Cooking is my therapy. I have a really weird love for Asian dramas. I don't know why, but one of my roommates when I was in college introduced me to Korean and Taiwanese dramas. So I've been watching them ever since. Hopefully at some point I'll become fluent in the language. And then I really, really enjoy HIIT and boot camp style workouts. So that's something I do on a weekly basis. So just a little few fun facts about me. And living in Colorado affords me the opportunity to go to the mountains. I know most Bahamians don't like the cold. I don't either, but it's really beautiful during the wintertime, especially when you get a chance to go skiing. So we did this thing about a year or two ago called snow biking. So it's very, very interesting. I found it better than skiing because I do not want to break my legs. And I feel like with this, you have better control over going down those slopes. So that was really fun. And then there's this really beautiful place here in Colorado called Maroon Bell. So it's kind of sits between mountain peaks, and during the fall season, it changes colors and it's just absolutely beautiful. So if you ever get a chance to visit, please do. All right, so now I always like to start out, any talk I do, I always like to start out with some brain teasers. That's just my little thing and I really like it. So let's see, and of course, feel free to take yourself off mute or answer in the chat or whatever have you. But we'll start with a couple of questions and I'll start to dive into the actual meat of this presentation. So survival of the fittest. Can the human body survive longer without food or water? So let's see if somebody wants to take a stab at answering that. Actually, sorry, I didn't hear that.
Without food.
Without food.
So can the human body survive longer without food or without water? So correct, you can survive longer without food, right? So as a general rule, people can survive up to 3 weeks without food and 3 days without water. But why?
Because the body can't survive without water for that long period of time.
That's a great answer, but I want you to take that a little bit deeper for me. So obviously we're talking about sports medicine, we're talking about science. So let's get a little into the nitty gritty. So yes, the body can't survive longer without water, but there's a reason behind that. So let's try to get into the understanding of that.
Is it because the body is 80% water?
It's 70% water. So what does that mean though? So if you can survive.
The body uses water for most of its processes.
Absolutely correct. And that's what I was looking for. Correct. So let's go to that. So food is an energy source, right? And water is a hydration source. So if we can go without food for a longer period of time, that's because we can replace the energy source that we get from food with the fat in our body. So that's why we can last longer. But with water, it's used in pretty much almost every process in your body. And so, and as somebody mentioned too, it makes up 70% of your body. So you would need water quicker than you would need food. So that's exactly why. All right, awesome. Let's go to another question. In terms of athletic training, why would an athlete train at higher altitudes? So for example, I live in Colorado, and where we currently live at, we are 5,280 feet above sea level. So why would an athlete want to come here to train at this level or even higher up in the mountains at higher altitudes? Why?
More oxygen. That's just a guess.
Said it again.
More oxygen.
More oxygen. That's correct, but I want some more information behind that. So why? And no Googling the answer either. I want to see if you guys can think about it.
Yes.
Anybody else can take a stab at it?
Altitude, I'll take a stab at it. Altitude training increases the red blood cells, which helps to
Absolutely
provide more
correct. Yeah, correct. Okay, and here's like a little bit deeper with that, because air is thinner at higher altitudes. It means that there's fewer oxygen molecules per volume of air. So if you're training at high altitude, you're getting less oxygen. So what does your body do to compensate for that? Creates more red blood cells to get more oxygen. So breath taken at high altitude delivers less of what working muscles require. So as a response, the body produces more red blood cells. All right. Awesome. And then next question, muscle mass. What is the largest muscle in your body?
Gluteus maximus.
Correct, your gluteus maximus. I always like to ask why, so you're going to hear this a lot throughout my presentation. Why? Does anybody know?
We need to use the glutes for walking, standing, sitting, a lot of activities.
Correct. All right, so it has the job of keeping the trunk of the body, so that's the upper part of your body, anything from your waist up in an erect posture, but it's also the chief anti-gravity muscle that aids in walking, upstairs, walking, standing, anything of that sort. Your glutes are pretty much central to that type of motion, and so that's the reason why they're the largest muscle in your body. All right. And the reason why I ask those questions too, I think they kind of get your mind thinking about different things, but also it's kind of getting your mind along the train of path, as we talked through this presentation about, if you understand something, then you also need to understand why, right? And so understanding the what and the why provides a better understanding, and just in terms of form and fit. And we're going to talk a little bit about form, fit, and function when it comes to design, and then obviously how that applies to sports. So what is biomedical engineering? So just in terms of a working definition, in essence, it is the study of medicine and engineering to improve healthcare. At the time when I became a biomedical engineer, I didn't know I wanted to be a biomedical engineer. I knew I wanted to work in the healthcare industry, but I also knew I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. I thought in my mind, I wanted to be the technology behind the medicine. So what actually makes people better? And it's not to say that doctors, of course, and nurses don't make people better, because they do. But the reality is, without certain machines, without certain devices and therapeutics, the diagnosis of disease, as well as the treatment of disease, will not be possible. So I think I was more so geared towards that side of things. And I thought I would become a scientist, quite honestly, and work on some novel type of research. But somehow I got accepted into the School of Engineering when I applied to college, and I was sitting there during orientation and had no clue why I was there. And after learning about the different types of disciplines of engineering, I landed on biomedical, and my mother was like, just choose this one. And I was like, okay, great, we'll choose this then. And literally that's my story of becoming an engineer. But I kind of think it was God's design for me to be that way, because after my first year, I loved it. I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I knew about this sooner. But either way, I landed into the field, and I've been here ever since. And so the reason why I think being a biomedical engineer is cool, because we have the job of doing several different things. And like it says here, we bridge the medical and engineering disciplines, providing an overall enhancement of healthcare. So without some of the devices and things that we create, healthcare wouldn't be as advanced as it is today, and it wouldn't be as useful and beneficial in terms of being able to have a lot of life-saving therapeutics and devices. And I think Shakitha mentioned this in her introduction about just some of the different things that we've created over time as a field, in terms of what is possible out there and what advancements we've created to help people over time. And then another point here is that we design and build innovative devices. So just some examples include artificial limbs and organs, new generation imaging machines, advanced prosthetics, and more, and even improved processes for genomic testing or making and administering drugs. So these are just some of the areas that we dive into as biomedical engineering. So the field is really diverse, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more as I go through the presentation, just the different focus areas. So understanding form and function. So that's something that I talked about earlier. So those brain teaser questions that I asked was to get your mind to wrap around, you know, we can understand the largest muscle in the body, and we can know it's the gluteus maximus, but if we don't understand why, then our knowledge is very surface level and very cursory. And so it's important to kind of take things a little bit deeper to understanding how our body works and why certain things are the way it is. And so I like this quote from the late Dr. Miles Monroe. I read a lot of his books, and I think that he's so prolific as an author, as a speaker, because he said this: when purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. And I like that statement because if you don't understand the purpose of something, you'll never use it to its fullest capacity or to its fullest potential, because you don't understand why it does what it does. And not only that, why it's made the way it is, why it's made. And so that leads me to my next point. Form follows function. This is a principle that states that the shape or the form of something, that the form that something takes should be chosen based on its intended purpose and function. So as engineers, we don't just design things just to design, and there's a reason why we do what we do. So if we're looking to design the next best prosthetic or the next best artificial heart valve, we have to make sure that as we're designing, the form fits the function. So if we have an intended purpose in mind, then everything that we design behind that, from the material itself to the way it actually functions, to the different aspects and components of it, all have to meet the purpose and the function. So when we think about our body is in essence a system, it's a machine. And the way it works is it has different components and different pieces that are working in tandem to provide us with everything we do today: breathing, blood flow, walking, standing, everything we do. Our body is made for it. And I think as human beings, we kind of take ourselves for granted because we don't really understand what a masterpiece that we are. And we don't understand that, you know, if we get a better handle on how our body works, we can control it better. So that's why I wanted to kind of highlight this principle of design when it comes to engineering, because when you design something, you have to understand the purpose of what you're trying to design it for, and then allow the form to fit the purpose. All right, next point. So just a couple of key innovations. So as a field, biomedical engineering is continuously evolving. So it doesn't stop. We've gone from, prosthetic foots that looked like, I wish I had put a picture of it here, but I did not. But the first prosthetic foot was actually made in Egypt a very, very long time ago, and it looked horrible. But if you see what they look like today, obviously there's been major advancements since then. But just some of the key innovations that have come around over time is, obviously, this is our artificial heart itself. So this is actually implanted into somebody's body because they have heart failure. And obviously they would go through a surgery process to actually implant this into their heart. This is kind of weird looking and interesting, but these are 3D printed body parts. So this is a nose and this is the ear. So nowadays we're using 3D printers to actually produce body parts, skin grafts and things of that sort. So that's another cool thing. I have to take pride in this center picture, and I put this at the center because this is something that my company actually created. So the pill camp. So if you know, when you go through surgery, if you want to actually identify something that's happening in the body, nowadays it's very hard to actually go into somebody's body invasively and determine what's going on, what's the problem. This pill cam is something that you swallow literally like a pill. It's the size of a pill, and it will take pictures as it's being ingested into your body to be able to identify things like cancer and things of that sort, to actually be able to see tumor growth and understand what's happening inside the body without having to cut somebody open and actually go inside to figure out what the problem is. So that's one of the cool innovations of today. Obviously, this here looks really interesting. This is surgical robotics. So actually my company, a portion of what we do actually is we're working on a major platform for surgical robotics as well. And of course, we've seen this before. This is a bionic hand or a prosthetic hand, but it's a very advanced mechanical form of it. So nowadays, mechanical or bionic hands are actually integrated in such a way where they're attaching those to your nerve endings, but you can actually control it by your through nerve endings. And so it's kind of cool the way we're moving and progressing as a field over time. So I won't even imagine what we'll look like in the next 10 to 20 years as things continue to evolve and progress. All right, just a couple of focus areas or areas of interest. So as I mentioned before, biomedical engineering as a field is extremely broad and diverse, but as you get into it, you might discover that there's different aspects of it that you're more so interested in than others. So there's things like biomechatronics. So we're talking about electrical components, mechanical components, and then applying that to the body itself, right? And then we talk about bioinstrumentation, which is, again, more so along the electrical side, but then things like ultrasounds, CAT scans, things like that are more so along the lines of bioinstrumentation. And then biomaterials, understanding things like tissue scaffolding, and then actually taking things and growing them outside of the body and then planting them back into the body. That's the area that biomaterials focuses on. Biomechanics, which is what we're going to talk about today, is understanding human movement and how that applies to the body. Bionics. So we talked about that bionic hand, right? So understanding how, a hand would work and then be able to develop some type of electrical or mechanical hand that then attaches to the body and then functions as a result of human movement. Cell and tissue engineering. This is just another aspect going a little bit deeper into understanding how cells and tissue work, and then re-engineering those by creating those outside of the body. Clinical engineering. So this is like really looking at what happens in the clinical field as far as looking at devices and looking at how things work as far as clinical trials. So there's a lot of engineers that focus on that aspect of when a device is made or created, then understanding how it applies in practice. Medical, this is supposed to say imaging. I don't know why it says imagine, but medical imaging. So again, we talked about CAT scans, MRIs, things like that. Biomedical engineers focus on that part of it too. Orthopedics. So obviously if you break your leg, if you break your arm, this is an aspect of engineering that some engineers decide to focus on. So this is the field of orthopedics. Rehabilitation engineering. So when we talk about, again, the same concept of breaking something, and then how do you rehab that person and bring them back to, or allow that muscle or that bone to come back to its full form and function, is through rehabilitation measures. So things like prosthetics are along the lines of rehabilitation engineering. And then we start talking about systems physiology, bio-nanotechnology, neural engineering. So again, the field is extremely diverse and broad. And if you get into it, you can kind of narrow down or hone in on which particular area of the field you want to particularly be a part of. But we will focus specifically, like I said, on biomechanics for today. All right, so the field of biomechanics itself, what's the working definition here? So it's in essence, mechanics applied to biology. And so when we talk about biomechanics, mechanics itself is the response of bodies to forces or displacements. So this takes us all the way back to physics. So I don't know if many of you took physics when you were in, in high school, and obviously even now in college. But when we talk about biomechanics, we have to have a really solid understanding of physics and how it applies to the body. Because when we talk about biology, it's obviously understanding living things, right? Understanding our tissues, cells, organs, things of that nature. But when we start to talk about mechanics, we're really talking about forces and displacements and how they apply to the body. So let's take a look a little bit further here. So this is somebody, and obviously they're in a runner stance and they're about to take off and go running somewhere. So the field of biomechanics will look at a person's joints. So obviously whether it's your hip joint or your shoulder joint, and what we do is we call it resolving it into forces. So you take that joint and then you resolve it into the different forces that are acting on that joint to create movement. So at this ankle joint here, you got a force here, you have a force acting on the joint. So this is really, like I said, I'm going to try not to get too much into it, but at the end of the day, in physics, we have these things called free body diagrams. So it's, in other words, taking an object and resolving it into its forces. And if we talk about Newton's second law, we talk about force equal to mass times acceleration, which is this little formula here. When you resolve the forces down into each part, you're trying to understand what motion is going to be created as a result of resolving those forces. Those forces eventually turn into motion, forward motion, linear motion. And so biomechanics is taking the understanding of your body from the joints to the bones, to the tendons, to the ligaments, to muscles, and understanding how we create motion, acceleration, and deceleration as a result of that. So it gets really complex, but I'm going to try to keep it very, very simple for the purposes of today's presentation. But that's essentially what you're doing when we talk about biomechanics. So progress in biomechanics, minimize this, has led to the development of the artificial heart valves, artificial joint replacements, as well as a better understanding of the function of the heart and lung, blood vessels, capillaries, bone, cartilage, intervertebral discs, ligaments, and tendons of the musculoskeletal systems. So all of that combined provide a better understanding of biomechanics. So if you really want to, as an athlete, get a better understanding of your body, and in terms of training, you have to understand how muscles originate and insert, how your tendons attach, what type of forces you're going to need to apply to your muscles to build strength and power. And that's just some of the things that we talk about when it comes to engineering performance, because you can control your performance if you understand the dynamics that create that type of performance. All right, let's go a little bit deeper. So it's in the details. So as I said, we're going to kind of go back to high school physics a little bit and then bring it forward to where we're at today in college and how we apply it in the real world. So when we learned about forces first when we were in high school or junior high school, we used to learn this saying that a force is a push or a pull. And that's like the very basic understanding of what a force is. But as you get into the physics realm and you get into college, you start to go a little bit deeper with that, right? And we start talking about things like weight, where weight is equal to mass times gravity. And then we get into Newton's second law and we start talking about force is equal to mass times acceleration. So I know this is a lot of math and physics in here, but it's important because there's no way for us to understand how our body works if we don't apply the science and the math. At the core of it, engineering is taking math and science and using it to solve problems. So you have to have a somewhat of a good competency or a good level of understanding in both subjects to be able to apply it effectively. So when we talk about force is equal to mass times acceleration, particularly when it relates to the body, we can look at it from two different perspectives. We can look at it as acceleration where when acceleration is equal to 0, we call it statics. So statics means that something is in equilibrium. It is not moving. Acceleration is equal to 0. So when we resolve the force, we're saying that the forces are going to sum up to 0. But if acceleration is not equal to 0, we call it dynamics. So in other words, it's moving. There's motion involved. So there's two different fields. And so when we talk about biomechanics, we can look at it from both a static perspective, but also from a dynamic perspective. So again, that's just the understanding that is acceleration equal to 0? Is it not equal to 0? And when we talk about resolving the forces, particularly using this equation of force equal to mass times acceleration, at a particular joint in your body, you're going to start talking about motion from a angular perspective. So when I say angular, we're talking about torque. So the other word for torque is what we call a moment. So the equation for that is a moment is equal to force times distance. So again, I know that's a lot of math and a lot of science, but you'll need it to understand where we're going. All right. So then as we dive a little bit deeper into this, we're going to talk a little bit about kinematics. So again, these are things that you should have heard about in college or in high school at some point. But kinematics, in essence, is the study of motion without regard to the cause of the motion. So we don't care what causes the motion. We just want to understand how that motion is happening, right? So in sport biomechanics, it's typically concerned with issues such as how fast an object or a human body is traveling. What are the rates of acceleration and deceleration? What pattern of motion was produced and what range of motion occurred during an athletic performance? So when we talk about throwing a ball, right, or even hitting a ball with a bat, we're transferring motion. And so we take kinematics to understand essentially how that motion is happening and how we're accelerating, how we're transferring force and momentum from our hand to the bat or to the ball or whatever we're talking about trying to throw or use. And then there's another word called kinetics, right? So kinetics is the study of forces. So again, kinematics, the study of motion. Kinetics, the study of forces. So in other words, the study of the causes of motion. So in order to understand biomechanics, we have to couple kinetics and kinematics. So kinetics being the study of forces, in other words, the things that cause motion, and then kinematics being the study of motion itself, right? That's the end result. So forces have many effects. One of special interest to biomechanists or kinesiologists, coaches, and athletes is to cause rotation. So remember I talked about it earlier before, and I talked about how we have rotation at our joints. So obviously our shoulder joint up top here, which is a ball and socket joint, we're able to rotate our arm, in different directions. So because of that rotation of the joint, we're able to create linear motion. I can move my hand up and down. I can move it forward, backwards. There's a lot of different motions that are created as a result of rotational movement at my joint. It's the same thing as a ball and socket joint at your hip joint. So let's go a little bit deeper in here. So muscles are arranged to create turning effects or rotational motion. So this effect is called a moment of force or a torque. And that's that equation that I showed earlier where it says a moment is equal to a force times the distance. So that rotational movement at your joint is what we call a moment of force or torque. We still require force from muscles, but the musculoskeletal system is essentially a system built to convert muscle forces to turning effects across joints. These internal joint moments ultimately produce forces or moments of forces against the environment to cause the linear motion of walking, running, sprinting, jumping, the rotational motion of pirouettes, spins, flips, or somersaults, or the forces and spins on objects thrown, batted, or kicked, right? So I hope you guys are getting an understanding of it now, but essentially it's so important to understand where it all starts. And really where it starts is a understanding of force, not just being a push or a pull, but a force being mass. So taking some object that has a mass to it and then applying an acceleration to it. And when you get that rotational force, that rotational motion at your joint, you're going to create that force from your muscles going to create linear motion, right? Again, we talk about kinetics and kinematics. So combining those things to create what we do today, such as walking, running, things of that nature. All right, so I have a video I want to show really quick. So I'm going to escape out of this. And hopefully this will kind of provide some better understanding. And Shakib, is there a way for me to make sure my sound is visible? Because I know sometimes on these Zooms, I'm not sure if you can actually hear the sound or not. So, but we'll try. Oops. It's not this video, it's this one. Okay, let's take it back. I'm gonna take it to this point here. And again, let me know if you can hear the video.
Time in world record time. Crowned the world's fastest human, Bolt betters his own.
I'm gonna pause for a second. Is everybody able to hear it?
Yeah, I can hear the audio.
Okay.
We're able to hear it.
Is the sound coming through the mic or is it being projected directly through through the system of Zoom? I don't know how that works sometimes, to be honest.
I think it's the mic.
It's the mic? I don't know if there's a better way to do it, because I know like when you meet in Google Meets, you can actually project the sound directly. So Shakita, do you know if there's a way to do that?
Year later at the World Championships in Berlin.
It's clear though. It's clear.
I can hear it clearly.
It's clear.
58 seconds.
I want after this London games, people should say, wow, when they turn their TV off, sit back in their chair for a minute, think about what just happened. That's what I'm looking forward to. I want to just wow people.
While fans admire his speed and showmanship, it's the biomechanics of Usain Bolt that intrigues mechanical engineers like Annette Hassoy, a professor at MIT who has been supported by the National Science Foundation.
Usain Bolt is unique in that somehow he is able to both get the top acceleration and maintain the top speed.
Bolt is amazing because someone his size isn't expected to move so well and so fast. But the exceptional combination of his size and his strength makes Bolt unlike any champion before him. At 6 feet 5 inches, Bolt is several inches taller than most of his rivals. His longer legs give him a naturally longer stride. Other elite runners average 44 steps to run 100 meters. Bolt averages just 41 steps.
His stride length is enormous. So every time he takes a step, he covers a tremendous amount of ground.
But because he is larger, Bolt has more mass than other sprinters and needs more strength, more force to move his body. With each step, Bolt generates enormous force against the ground. The ground applies that force back, propelling Bolt forward. Bolt moves more mass than other runners, and he moves it faster.
The amount of force that you can give to the ground depends partially on your technique, but mostly on how much strength you have in your muscles.
Bigger muscles generate more force. So Bolt, like all sprinters, trains hard at the track and in the weight room.
I work really hard now because I'm not really a fan of the gym, but you have to do it to get that strength work, that power you need to get out of the block.
Strength isn't just how big is the muscle, but it's how big is the muscle and how much force can it produce while it's moving.
How the muscles function during motion is part of the research conducted by Samuel Hamner, a mechanical engineer at Stanford University, who has also received support from the National Science Foundation. Hamner collects data in a motion capture room using infrared cameras and sensors and creates dynamic simulations, information that can help treat movement disorders and also help athletes optimize their performance.
If we can understand what the functional roles of these muscles are, it might help Usain Bolt change his training or better understand how he can become faster.
Hamner explains that as Bolt sprints down the track, more than 30 muscles in each leg work together in complex coordination during the 2 phases of the running gait, the stance phase and the flight phase. In the stance phase, Bolt has at least 1 foot on the ground.
When your foot first hits the ground, you're actually slowing down, you're braking your body, and you're using muscles in your thigh, like your quadriceps, to actually slow you down and support your weight while you're coming into contact with the ground. In the second half of the stance phase, you start then accelerating your body forward again. And this time you're using some different muscles, your calf muscles, to push yourself up and accelerate you forward as you then lift off into the flight phase.
In the flight phase, Bolt has both feet off the ground. His hamstring muscles on the back of the thigh pull the leg down before his foot hits the ground again. The flight phase showcases Bolt's superior stride length. He's in the air longer, flying farther with each powerful step.
So there's actually kind of very precise actuation of each of the muscles when you're running. If you're off by a few milliseconds, forces, you'll fall over or you'll injure yourself. So it takes precise timing of the electrical signal that comes from your brain to your muscle to create that force.
If Usain Bolt is at his biomechanical best, he could turn in another spectacular time in London's Olympic Stadium.
For me, it's just the strength and the length of my stride, everything comes together, which makes it look so superb.
And when it all comes together, it's a thrilling race to the finish line.
Okay, so that's that part there. Okay, let's go back to my presentation here. Okay, so any questions on that? And I kind of don't want to keep talking so much, but I want to give there to be more feedback. And I know we're going to run short on time soon too, because I actually have to jump off the call in about 5-10 minutes for a meeting, another meeting I have for work. But like, is it making sense now? Like, are you guys understanding how you can change your training methodology based on understanding how forces apply to your body and understanding how that force generation will produce what we call power and strength? Like, are there questions so far on what we've discussed?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Dr. Miller.
Hi, Dr. Miller.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. I mean, I know this comes into conjunction with, well, actually ties into what you just presented with regards to biomechanics with sprinters who are of much shorter stature and sprinters who are in taller stature. Biomechanically, how do you approach their training?
So that's a really good question. So when I think about it in the weight room, and so this is supposed to be a part of my presentation too, but unfortunately, somehow my other computer died. And so there's some pieces of it that I didn't get to add to this presentation today. But when we talk about building power and strength, I know that when we talk about a person that's taller, they're gonna have a longer stride and a larger gait. So what you have to do for the person that is shorter in stature, when you're training them in the weight room, you have to focus on lifting heavier, but at the same time, for shorter duration. So shorter reps, but heavier duration, because what you're going to do to your muscles, not only are you going to shock them, but you're also going to build them in a way that you produce more power. Because even though somebody could have a longer stride, if you are quicker because you have more power in your muscles, you're able to move further. So remember, we talked about how the muscles in your body and how they connect to your bones, they create that force at that joint. So when you're contracting and relaxing at the same time, if you build more power, you can translate that force into motion at a quicker rate than a person that has a longer stride, because you're able to move a further distance than they can because you've built up more power. So really, right. It doesn't matter in terms of the size. In training, it's all about your training technique. So you have to understand whether you're doing deadlifts, squats, power cleans, you have to focus on lifting heavier, but at shorter reps, that you build more power in your muscles.
Okay, a second part to that question, and still basically the same question with a shorter athlete of shorter stature versus an athlete with a taller stature, how best to utilize their upper limbs, because, you know, the taller athlete will have longer upper limbs, and, you know, biomechanically, you refer to the upper and lower limbs as levers. So you have to utilize these levers efficiently.
Right. Right. So that's when we start talking about mechanical advantage, right? And so when we talk about looking at levers, when we talk about mechanical advantage, you have to multiply the power and multiply the force that you're getting out of that well, I'll call it joint still, because we're still talking about bodies, right? So this is how I like to refer to it. So there are times when I go to class, because I go to this weightlifting class on Mondays called Body Pump. And so there are times when she's making us lift, but she's making us lift closer in or further apart. So when you're training, you have to understand the formulas that I used before. We talked about a moment is equal to force times distance. If you want to amplify the force that you're getting out of a particular muscle, you have to focus on distance. So if I'm holding a barbell in my hand and I have weight at the ends, and whether it's 2 10 plates at each end, do I focus on more so holding it closer in or further out? If I want to amplify the amount of force that I'm getting at a muscle to my muscles, I have to focus on perhaps keeping my keeping the distance further, keep coming in. Because if I bring the distance in, that means my muscle's gonna have to use more force in order to lift that weight. But if I move it out, then the weight is more evenly distributed and it's more so targeting a broader range of muscles. So I'm not getting as much power to a particular set of muscles. So I would say when we talk about levers, if you want to really truly focus on mechanical advantage, then you have to, in your weightlifting technique, focus on decreasing the distance so that you're increasing the force applied to the muscle.
Yeah, so it's a matter of selective engagement.
Exactly, exactly. So even when you're talking about bicep curls, there's a reason why when you're doing bicep curls, you decide to bring your arms in and you're focusing mainly on just doing the motion from at midpoint up here versus coming all the way down or doing it at mid-level because you're being able to apply the forces. So it's about understanding what technique do I need to apply to maximize force at those joints or to gain mechanical advantage from a systematic standpoint as a lever. So
yeah, like I say, I buy what you sell it.
Okay, that's good. I think somebody else had a question because I think we only have time now for questions. So I'm just going to answer questions. I'm unable to see the chat. I think, let's pull up some questions here. No questions in the chat? Yeah, so I'll just give an example too. When I took biomechanics in college, like I said, it was my favorite subject. And then when I got out of college and I went to grad school, I started looking a little bit further into it and my whole outlook changed because, you know, as students, it's so good to be able to understand this stuff, even if you're not going to actually use it in real life, because it changes your technique, it changes your ability to train, and it changes your ability to work out in the gym. So the way I work out today in the gym is completely different with this newfound knowledge than when I used to when I was just starting out in college. So whenever I train now, I purposely think about if I want to have more cuts in my arms, if I want to build more muscle, what type of movements do I want to emphasize more? So do I want to decrease the distance so I can amplify the moment or the force being applied to my muscles? Or do I want to lift heavier so I get that short burst of energy that my muscle, I kind of shock them so I can build more power at the same time? So I see a question just came in.
Yeah, we do have another question in the chat.
Yeah, I just see there. What advice would you give to someone interested in pursuing a career in biomedical engineering, and what were some of the challenges you had in pursuing your career? So in terms of pursuing a career in biomedical engineering, I think you have to first understand, don't just come into it just to come into it, know where you want to take it, like what direction you want to go into. Because if you want to apply it to sports, I think that's great and you can do it. But that means when you come in, it may be helpful to understand if there's a particular school that has a really solid biomechanics portion of that particular program, but also understanding, are there connections to other companies and other research opportunities where you can have a better chance at being able to come out of there and maybe get some internships or things of that nature. So I would say understand where you want to take it, like where do you want to work? Because obviously not all biomedical engineers work in sport. I work directly in medical devices. And so I hope to transition my career at some point to maybe work for a company like Nike or Under Armour, because I'm really into that kind of stuff nowadays. And so they hire biomechanics, they hire biomedical engineers to even like design their tennis shoes, to understand like how the force is when you're running, to get a better, to reduce the impact on your joints. So that way when you're, because you know, people who run a lot, they end up having bad knees and really bad ankles. But if you can design better shoes that can absorb most of that impact when you're hitting the ground, so you can better distribute the forces throughout your legs and your ankles, then, you know, all that science. So they need people who understand that kind of stuff. So to answer the other part of the question, what challenges did I have? I would say, and this is an unfortunate thing / fortunate thing, the Bahamas in terms of our educational system, I don't think we're advanced enough at a high school level, because when we think about schools in the US and the UK and every other place, there's not a requirement that you have to take calculus, right? We don't, for many of us, we don't touch calculus until we get to college. And if you do at some point, fortunately for me, I took pre-calc in high school, and that's because I had already passed the BGCSE. And so for my 12th grade year, we took an advanced form of math and we were able to take pre-calculus. But that's not going to be the case for every single person. So if you want to pursue a career in engineering, one of your challenges is going to be making sure that you understand calculus and making sure that you get it early versus waiting to get to college. Because for me, because I didn't have calculus off the bat, I found that a lot of my peers in college were a little bit more advanced than I was, because they had already seen some of the material. So I would say that was like one of my challenges coming into college, was getting a better handle on calculus and really, you know, letting them absorbing the material and not feeling disadvantaged, because my educational career, you know, prior to coming to college didn't really prepare me as best as it could have. So I would say that was probably a challenge. And then another question was, what kind of pharmaceuticals have been designed through biomedical engineering. So in terms of pharmaceuticals, I would say anything from vaccines. So vaccines are actually produced by biomedical engineers. That's one part of it. Biomedical engineers are also involved even in producing, so we might not produce the bulk powder that creates some pills. So I worked at PharmaChem in Freeport, but I didn't really play a role in terms of a biomedical engineering capacity. I played a role more as a mechanical engineer. So I would say when we talk about the capsule that pills, that coat pills, biomedical engineers are actually a part of the process in creating the capsules that coat pills. So the coating, that's also a part of what biomedical engineers can do as well when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So we may not necessarily design the process or the pill itself, but the coating on it is a part of what we do, as well as even vaccines themselves. Mr. Miller, another question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's a two-part question. The first part is probably going to be very simple for you to answer with regards to orthotics and their role in reducing ankle and knee pains in runners, particularly, I guess, in mid-distance and long-distance runners, on your opinion on the lack of usage. And my second part is what your opinion is on what can be done to reduce decreasing the injury to our young throwers.
So on the orthotics piece, this is a good question. Hopefully I can answer properly. So my husband actually has flat feet, and so he has to wear orthotics. So when we went to the doctor, a foot doctor,
You're having a little bit of a feedback with your sound.
Is it better now?
Something changed, like the mic is a little fuzzy.
That's weird. Is it better now?
Nope.
No, I don't know what's happening.
Maybe try mute and unmute.
Okay.
The question was too hardy.
I don't know what happened to my mic. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
No.
You may have to take off your camera just for a moment, just ask the question.
Yeah, let me turn off the camera. Okay, is it better now?
Mm-mm. No, not yet.
Okay, I'm gonna log off real quick and try to log back in and see what happens.
Okay.
Is it better now?
Much better.
Okay.
Much better.
I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so Mr. Miller, Dr. Miller, sorry, to answer your question. So in terms of orthotics, so yeah, my husband is flat-footed, and so that causes a lot of knee problems for him. And so what happens when we went to the doctor told us that because he's so flat-footed and because of the forces that are created on his foot, what's happening is that his tendons are really tight and his muscle in his leg is really tight. So what he has to do is he has to strengthen his calf muscle in order to be able to do a little bit more extension and flexion. So he's reducing the pressure that's being held at his ankles, because sometimes his ankles hurt him a lot too. So what orthotics tend to do is they provide an extra level of cushion, relieving his ankle of some of that pressure so he can have an opportunity to use more of his calf muscle versus the tendons attaching to his ankle, because they're feeling more pressure. If you can strengthen your calf as a result of that, you're going to be relieving the pressure that happens there. So I think orthotics are useful and helpful, but as long as you're doing the proper exercises along with that too, and understanding that what needs to be strengthened so that that's to compensate for what the orthotic is actually helping to compensate for. So it's like you have to do things in tandem. So I hope that kind of answers the question for you, at least with the orthotic piece. Yeah. And then what was the other question? I think I forgot what it was.
With regards to extraneous means to prevent injuries in throwers.
So in throwers, like when people at shot put and discus and things of that nature at that shoulder joint having to throw a lot. I would
Right.
say,
especially in younger athletes who are still growing, but at the same time, because of the training and they're building up that muscle mass, and you see a trend that they're getting a lot of shoulder impingement.
yeah, I would say honestly, in the training process, it is going to be strength training, but I would say also at the same time, it's going to be your recovery process. What do you do afterwards, right? Because you have to give your muscles time to heal and time to recover after you do a lot of those things. So I think that's not an area that I'm as well versed in, to be quite honest, but I would say the recovery process is going to be really helpful with that in terms of being able to reduce injury. What do you do after the training process? What do you do after competition to actually help those muscles to be able to recover and heal, and reducing pressure at those joints as much as possible? So
Yeah,
I would say
because
that's
it's a sticking point, especially in the throwers, because the balance between muscle growth and bone growth is not balanced.
It's not. No, it's not.
Especially after the training, with throwing and throwing and throwing, the muscles tend to exceed the bone growth.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and it's not like you can intentionally grow bone. You can't necessarily do that. So I think it's what you're doing in the process to allow that recovery to take place. And also in terms of how you're eating too, that's another big piece of it. Nutrition is a big part of it as well. So all of that combined together is what feeds into actually helping to reduce injury, because a lot of it will be as a result of inflammation, and inflammation anywhere in the body, can be reduced in terms of what you put into your body as well, and also what you're doing to recover afterwards. So I think those are things that we have to do outside of just the strength training itself and understanding the biomechanics of the shoulder joint and how do we get better performance, but also how do we eat and then how do we recover. So. Were there any other questions? I think I have time for one more question. I have to drop off.
Questions and answer. I did put a question inside the chat for you, Trenicka, before we go.
Is it the one about what prerequisite degrees would one need to pursue a master's degree?
Biomechanics, the role of biomechanics in injury, preventing injury and causes of injury.
Okay, so in terms of preventing injury and the causes of injury itself, I think it's back down to that basic scientific formula, right? If I understand my joints or my movement, right? And if I understand how to apply forces at those movements and doing it in the right way, because it's all about orientation as well. So if I understand when I do a bicep curl, if I'm doing it in a way that's extraneous, or if I'm not doing it, or my form isn't proper, then that's when I can cause injury. So I think biomechanics is about understanding how the human body works, understanding my application of muscles, tendons, ligaments, how they insert and originate on my different bones, and making sure that my form is proper, then I can actually avoid injury by making sure that I'm producing the right level of stress and pressure at the muscle so it can grow, and not necessarily in a way that's counterproductive to what I'm trying to do. So that's where biomechanics comes into play as far as preventing injury is concerned. So if you understand the movements, if you understand the form, and you understand what type of force you're trying to apply to get a certain result. And that's why in training, they talk about make sure you have the proper form. Like, we rather you have the proper form and do it slower or do less reps than try to just quickly go through it and trying to get it done to meet a certain number of reps, but your form is off. Because when your form is off, that's where injury happens. So biomechanics helps with understanding form and how that plays into actually getting the desired result that you want at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think I have to drop off now, but Shakita, again, thank you for this opportunity. I'll be more than happy to come back and do it a second time, because I know there's some information I didn't get a chance to share, but it was a pleasure having you all. And Shakita, you can feel free to share my email, or matter of fact, I can drop it in the chat right now. If anybody else wants to reach out, I'm always available, more than happy to talk through some of this stuff. So I will drop my email in the chat. So thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thanks for having you. I know you have to go, so we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Okay, that ends our session for today. That's very informative. I think topics that all of us can use as coaches. We saw some examples of different sports, weight training, injury prevention. So I think it was a very good presentation, and thanks for everybody that joined in. And thank you, Dr. Kerr.